important when we're thinking about histamine because it really contains a lot of DAO enzyme. Okay, so we've got DAO enzyme all throughout the gut, but it's highly concentrated in the small intestine. So covering SIBO is really important. However, we also need to think about the large intestine. Now, the large intestine is the home to the majority of our microbiome. Okay, so for those of you who've worked with me, you know how much I've discussed the microbiome and its incredible roles in human health. Okay, and when it's disrupted, okay, so when there's an overgrowth of bad bacteria and an undergrowth of good bacteria, this is called dysbiosis. Okay, so it's often called large intestinal dysbiosis or LIBO. Okay, so you've got SIBO and LIBO. Okay, and LIBO is a major cause of histamine intolerance. Okay, so I'm going to be discussing all the reasons why that is. So what we need to understand is the gut microbiome, there's literally trillions of bacteria, okay, in the large bowel. Now, many of these bacteria are what we call commensal. Now, commensal means that they're normal. They're meant to be in the large intestine. But what can happen is you can get an overgrowth of these commensal bacteria whereby they become too high, okay? And at the same time, if you're getting this overgrowth of this certain strains of bacteria, it can overpopulate the gut microbiome with these strains that are causing you a problem. Okay, so also at the same time, you can start to get an undergrowth of beneficial bacteria. Okay, so there actually are bacteria, these commensal bacteria, when they grow too high, they increase histamine. And what they are doing is they are taking histidine, they stimulate the cells of the intestine to create histamine. And how they do that, and this is separate from mast cells, right? This is epithelial cells of the gut, right? So gut cells. They stimulate the cells to take histidine and convert it into histamine. Okay, so you are then therefore getting an overgrowth of histamine bacteria and increasing your histamine load. So in my book, I do detail all of these bacteria, okay, that I'm looking for when I'm doing stool testing. Okay, so there are specific ones. I'm going to read this. Okay, these are common histamine-releasing bacteria. So Klebsiella, Citrobacter, Campylobacter, okay, Enterococcus, these Streptococcus, E. coli, these are common bacteria in the large intestine. If they get too high, they're going to stimulate this enzyme. It's called the histidine decarboxylase enzyme. Takes histidine, converts it into histamine. Okay. Now, there are also bacteria that can become overgrown in the large intestine that are what we call gram-negative bacteria. Okay. Gram-negative bacteria actually contain, as part of their structure, what we call lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, and they're toxins. They're highly inflammatory to the human gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so these LPS toxins are a major cause of inflammation. So the inflammation that damages the tissues of the cells of the large intestine. What happens is this histidine decarboxylase enzyme gets stimulated by this inflammation, and it will convert histidine into histamine. Okay, so this is happening separately to a mast cell issue. Okay, so yes, mast cells might get involved, but we need to understand it's not just mast cells, it is cells, local cells in the gut. Okay, and these cells make histamine on the spot when challenged by inflammation, which is different from mast cells. So mast cells store histamine and they get triggered on the spot quickly when there is an antigen, which is like a toxin coming into the body. Whereas these cells in the gut are actually releasing histamine or creating histamine to deal with this chronic inflammation that can cause from dysbiosis. Okay, so the dysbiosis that occurs from an overgrowth of certain bacteria and an overgrowth of gram-negative bacteria, and then all the inflammation that causes is going to stimulate more histamine in the large intestine. Okay, now dysbiosis is also going to be a major cause of leaky gut, and I'm going to do another live on leaky gut, but essentially when you have a leaky gut, you are going to get toxins and bacteria go into the bloodstream where your immune system is going to have a histamine reaction due to that overload of toxins and bacteria that can get into the bloodstream. Okay, so really important to do stool testing to really look at what is going on with the microbiome in the large intestine. Okay, so some of the best testing available in Australia, the Nutripath comprehensive digestive stool analysis, or you can do the microbiome mapping. The microbiome map does offer us a sort of more information about what's going on with the gut. So the microbiome map will look at the bacteria, okay? It will look at the beneficial bacteria, like how much good bacteria do you have? It will also look for some of these histamine releasing bacteria. It will look for these gram-negative bacteria. It will also look for yeast or candida, which we know is a big cause of oxalate and another cause of histamine intolerance. Also look for parasites. But what this test actually also offers us, which is really valuable information, it looks at what is going on with your immune system, your body. So the bugs, the bacteria, they're their own separate entity, okay? And then you have your cells, your tissue, your digestive enzymes, your immune system in the gut. So the microbiome map will look at things like Secretory Rga. So Secretory Rga is a type of mucus that is really important in the gut because it's like this slippery substance whereby bad pathogens get caught and then they get excreted in the stools. Okay, so it can see if you've got low levels of Secretory Rga. It also looks for beta-glucaronidase enzyme. So the beta-glucaronidase enzyme is what deconjugates estrogen and other toxins in the gut. So if you've got high beta-glucaronidase enzyme, you're breaking apart toxins, which is going to be inflammatory and histamine releasing, and it is also going to deconjugate estrogen, meaning there's more active estrogen, meaning that there's more estrogen to increase histamine. Okay, so they're just two examples of what else can be tested in this microbiome mapping test that is in addition to what's going on with the bad bugs. Okay, so if you're overseas in the US in particular, the doctor's data comprehensive digestive stool analysis is very good. The Genova GI effects test is very, very good. Okay, so there are lots of microbiome tests available. If you are specifically looking at histamine, and you want to get a grasp on what bacteria are going to release histamine, there are many, and I do detail them in my book. And I've got resources too in my book around where you can get really, really comprehensive lists of what these bad bacteria are. Okay, so it's time for questions. So Matt wants to know, how do you reduce these LPS toxins? So great question. So the first thing you want to do is do a stool test to understand what gram-negative bacteria you have, and then look at the specific herbs that can reduce those bacteria. Okay. Now, the good news about herbal medicine is that the antimicrobial herbs have a really basically broad spectrum. Okay, so things like allicin and oregano and thyme, myrrh, clove, all of these herbs are really broad-acting antimicrobial. But what can specifically reduce LPS toxins when we're considering herbal medicine is berberine. Okay, so berberine is an active constituent of several plants. The plants with the highest amount of berberine are philodendron and golden seal. So berberine will kill off the bad bacteria, and it also reduces the LPS toxin load that these gram-negative bacteria are producing in your gut, okay? The other thing that can actually reduce LPS toxins is Saccharomyces boulardii, okay? So, Matt, there are two things that you can try, Berberine and Saccharomyces boulardii. So Leonie wants to know, what herbs can treat these histamine bacteria? So, Leonie, this is what I was just saying. The really good thing about herbal medicine and the antimicrobial herbs is that they are very broad spectrum acting. Okay, so you'll find that most of the commercial supplement or herbs companies do a mix of different herbs. They'll often have berberine, they'll often have oregano, they'll often have sort of garlic in the form of allicin. So allicin is the active constituent of garlic that's very antimicrobial. Thyme, sage, all of these sort of, it's actually interesting, the culinary herbs are extremely broad spectrum antimicrobial. So there's lots of different mixes out there. You probably just, it's good to actually try and get one that's quite broad spectrum. Okay, so Rachel's got a question. What if you've got SIBO and all this bad bacteria in the gut at the same time? Okay, so this is very, very common. Okay, it's really common to have an overgrowth of bad bacteria in the large intestine and an undergrowth of good bacteria and SIBO at the same time. Now, one of the reasons this happens is that if you've got SIBO, what's happening is you are actually removing, or you're not allowing, the foods that are meant to bypass the small intestine to get to the large intestine to provide a food source for the good bacteria, because the SIBO bacteria are eating them. Okay, so FODMAP foods and resistant starch are meant to bypass the small intestine. They'll go down to the large bowel, and beneficial, the healthy sort of bacteria in the large intestine, you know, the bifidobacteria and the lactobacilli, what they will do is take resistant starch and FODMAPs and convert them into short-chain fatty acids. And the short-chain fatty acids help consistently heal the gut and stimulate the immune function of the gut. So if you've got, and then what happens if you're starving off the good bacteria, what's going to happen is the large bacteria is going to grow more. So this is the dysbiosis thing. It's an imbalance, okay? It's the imbalance between the good and bad, okay? So what you have to do is really get rid of the SIBO first, so that you can then reintroduce FODMAP foods and resistant starch, which can go down to the large bowel and feed the good bacteria in the large bowel. Okay. So Caitlin's got a really good question. Do these antimicrobials kill the good bacteria too? Well, this is really interesting, Caitlin. And this is something I used to always ask my herbal medicine teachers, is like, how can these bacteria save the good and kill the bad? Okay, but most of the culinary herbs do actually do that. Okay, so the thyme and the allicin, the oregano, the clove, they can balance the microbiome. And I know that sounds like a very vague thing to say, but that herbal medicine is like that. Someone said to me yesterday, herbs have co-evolved with humans and bacteria forever. Okay, so they've got a symbiotic relationship. Now, saying that, the berberine is the strongest. And if you have taken a lot of antibiotics, it's probably not a good idea to go in with a really strong herb like berberine. Myrrh's the same, so myrrh's also really, really strong. So when I see patients that have been on a lot of antibiotics for a long time, I don't go in with antimicrobials. I will start doing repair to the gut, often using partially hydrolyzed guar gum to start increasing the levels of good bacteria. So the good thing about partially hydrolyzed guar gum, it's prebiotic, but it's not a FODMAP. And then you need to ascertain what is the cause of the gut issues, and often it's digestive enzyme insufficiency. So it's not necessarily the way I go with just giving people more herbs, especially if they've been on antibiotics for a long time. Okay. So this question, do these broad-spectrum antimicrobial herbs affect the entire microbiome, having negative effects on both good and bad bacteria? So Nathan, I think that's exactly what I was saying, okay? these antimicrobial herbs, which are culinary herbs, have co-evolved with humans and the bacteria in our gut for, I don't know, millions of years, okay? And they do have a balancing action. And I know it's hard to get your head around because, I mean, I've got a really scientific brain and I would always ask my herbal medicine teachers about this, but it's just the way it is. However, so think about it. Oregano you can eat, thyme you can eat, clove you can cook with, okay? Garlic you can eat. These culinary herbs can have a balancing effect. When you're looking at more plant medicine like berberine and myrrh, then they're the ones that are the stronger and will kill off some of the good guys as well. Okay, so Renee wants to know, can you get these stool tests from your doctor? Well, in Australia, it's generally, if you go to the doctor to do a stool test, they're generally just doing a test to look for a pathogen, okay? Like a bad bacteria or a bad parasite or maybe even candida, but it's not what we call a comprehensive digestive stool analysis. So the thing with a comprehensive digestive stool analysis, it doesn't just look for bad bugs, it looks at the good bugs. What's going on with the good bacteria? Because, you know, to get on top of your chronic gut issues, you need to make sure that you're working out a protocol that's going to support the production of your good bacteria. And if you do a good comprehensive digestive stool analysis, it's also going to look at the health of your immune system. Secretory Rga, it will look at pancreatic enzymes, it will look at bile acids, it will look at hydrochloric acid. Okay, so they're often not comprehensive enough, the stool tests that the doctors are doing. Okay, so Nicole wants to know, can you tell the difference between SIBO, candida and strep? Now, Nicole, really, you know, the symptoms of essentially bacteria or candida in the gut that are causing inflammation, sometimes they can be very, very, very obvious to a trained eye, I guess. So when people come in to see me with severe bloating, severe belching, severe flatulence, they feel exhausted. They have taken a lot of antibiotics, for instance. They have huge histamine issues. Then it sort of says SIBO to me a lot, okay? Now, if they are presenting with, if they do have candida, they often have a lot of brain fog. They have terrible sugar addiction with candida. They often have a white coating in their mouth. They'll often have vaginal thrush, okay? Strep's a bit hard to sort of ascertain because it can be any kind of gut issue, inflammatory issue or histamine issue. So the answer is it is hard, and it's just taken lots and lots of clinical practice to sort of go, oh, this is what we think is the main problem, but I'll always test, okay? So if you do a comprehensive digestive stool analysis, you'll be able to look for the candida and the strep, and if you do a SIBO test, then you'll understand if you've got SIBO, okay? So it's good to get the evidence to actually understand exactly what's driving your problems. Okay, so Tim's got a question. I've got chronic constipation. Is this due to bad bacteria in the large bowel or could it be SIBO? So Tim, chronic constipation can be due to many things, okay? Now, absolutely it can be caused from SIBO, specifically methane SIBO, as it slows down the motility of the large bowel, okay? It can also be due to having dysbiosis in the large intestine, okay? So that can cause inflammation, and for many people that causes constipation, but clinically, you know, inflammation can also cause a lot of loose stools, okay? So you can't exactly tell what's causing the constipation without testing, okay? So do a comprehensive digestive stool analysis, also do a SIBO testing to actually really ascertain what's going on. So, okay, so I've got a question from Jane. This is what I was talking about. She's got high beta glucaronidase enzyme on a stool test. So what does this mean? Okay, so the gut microbiome actually contains what we call the estrobiome. It's actually the biome, the microbiome that is meant to be there to deconjugate estrogen. Women need this. You need these bacteria in the large bowel to take estrogen and deconjugate it, break apart the bonds so that it is active estrogen. Women need active estrogen. We need estrogen for follicle development and ovulation. Okay, we need estrogen for brain health, for skin health. Okay, for all female characteristics, you need estrogen, right? Now, this is all fascinating to me, and there is actually specific bacteria that are these estrogen-increasing bacteria. So there's a whole field of research going on into that. But what can happen is that you can have too many of these estrogen-producing bacteria. Now, they are commensal, right, i.e. normal to the microbiome, but when they are in amounts that are too large, okay, too much, what can happen is they release an enzyme called the beta-glucuronidase enzyme. Okay, they're meant to, but when there's too many of them, you have too much beta-glucuronidase enzyme. The beta-glucuronidase enzyme takes estrogen that the liver has packaged up all safe for passage to the bowel, and it deconjugates it, meaning it's more active. Now, often this is going to cause problems. It's going to cause more estrogen, which is going to cause PMS, premenstrual syndrome, or premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which will be terrible mood swings before your period, specifically like you feel depressed, you can feel irritable, you can feel anxious, you can get insomnia, you can get hot sweats, you can get a real worsening of your histamine symptoms at that time because estrogen increases histamine. So migraines are a classic sign of that, just headaches, migraines, nausea, okay, or a worsening of any of your pre-existing histamine symptoms premenstrually or at ovulation when estrogen is peaking. Okay, and this is often due to this beta-glucuronidase enzyme breaking apart all the estrogen, making it more active. Okay, so the estrogen is stimulating mast cells to release histamine. Okay, so what the good news about this beta-glucuronidase enzyme is that there is a supplement, it's called calcium deglucarate, which is brilliant because it reduces the beta-glucuronidase enzyme. So a lot of my patients have been on calcium deglucarate. So that's what's happening. It's reducing the beta-glucuronidase enzyme in your gut so you're not deconjugating all your estrogen, so you don't have too much estrogen. Okay, so Jessica wants to know about more about Secretory Rga. And she has low Secretory Rga in her stool test. So what does that mean? Okay, so this is part of the reason why these comprehensive digestive stool analysis tests and the microbiome mapping tests are so brilliant is because it shows you a snapshot of your immune system. So Secretory Rga is part of your immune system, okay? It is there to protect the gut. It is there to help the body expel unwanted bugs, okay? So it is like a slippery layer inside the entire gastrointestinal tract, traps pathogens and removes them from the bowel, okay? So it's extremely, extremely important to have good levels of Secretory Rga, okay? How you can actually support Secretory Rga is with taking Saccharomyces boulardii, is it actually increases Secretory Rga, okay? So Saccharomyces boulardii is often used for traveller's diarrhea. Okay, it's great to take travelling because it increases Secretory Rga. So these foreign bugs that you kind of get into your gut, even from drinking water, it can really help push them out in the bowel. Okay, so that's kind of why Saccharomyces boulardii can be so helpful for traveller's diarrhea. Okay, so Sally's got a question, which is how do I increase the bacteria that degrade histamine? Okay, so I don't think I covered this before. There are actually certain bacteria that can break down histamine in the large intestine. And specifically, it's the bifidobacteria species, all of them. And there are certain lactobacillus species that can break down histamine, which I do detail in my book. So lactobacillus plantarum, lactobacillus rhamnosus, and Lactobacillus cereus and curvatus. Those Lactobacillus strains degrade histamine, and all the Bifidobacteria strains. Okay, so just a caution, beware, a lot of Lactobacillus strains increase histamine, including Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is the most common. Okay, so how do we increase these Bifidobacteria and healthy Lactobacillus strains? Okay, number one, you have to treat SIBO, because if you don't treat SIBO, the FODMAP foods and resistant starch that are meant to feed these bacteria so that they can grow it's getting trapped in the small intestine and causing havoc. Anyone with SIBO will know it causes havoc and terrible symptoms. You got to get rid of the SIBO bacteria and fix SIBO. Okay, then you can start to eat the FODMAP foods and resistant starch. And if the SIBO is gone, it will bypass the small intestine, it will go down to the large bowel, and these bacteria will take the FODMAP foods and resistant starch so that they can grow and proliferate. And the reason that they're so beneficial, these good bacteria, is because they produce short-chain fatty acids. Okay, so that's what you really need to do long-term. What you can do in the meantime, if you've got SIBO and you need to fix it, is most people with SIBO will tolerate partially hydrolyzed guar gum, because it is a food for these good bacteria in the large bowel, and it's not a FODMAP. Because a lot of the other prebiotic fibers, fructooligosaccharides and galacto-oligosaccharides, which are called FOS or GOS in the prebiotic world, are FODMAP. But partially hydrolyzed guar gum is not. So if you can tolerate that and get it down to the large bowel, it can actually help proliferate the good bacteria in the large bowel. Okay. So Nicole's got a question. She's got high Archimisia and high strep and high Morganella. Does this point to SIBO? Nicole, you can't test SIBO from doing a large stool test. It's a completely different thing. You need to do the SIBO breath test to see if there is bacteria in the small intestine that are taking FODMAPs and resistant starch and converting it into gas. You can't 100% tell if you've got SIBO from a large stool tests from the large intestine. I'm looking at my list for Archimisia. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure if it is a histamine-releasing bacteria. Morganella is, though. So Morganella is a histamine-producing bacteria, and so is strep. Okay, so if that's happening in the large bowel, that needs to be treated, and then you need to also look at testing for SIBO. Okay. All right, guys. So now, thanks, guys. That's it for me. I'm going to post this. I'm going to save it and post it on my Instagram feed and on Facebook, so you can go back and listen to any of the information that you need to know. Thanks for joining. I'll see you on Saturday.